next guest is a critically acclaimed audio producer, host, storyteller, and an avid pop culture enthusiast. He is the host of the television and film review podcast, Leaving the Theater, host of the storytelling podcast, Wait For It, and is also a regular contributor to NPR's Pop Culture Happy Hour as a guest panelist. Please welcome Ronald Young Jr. What makes for a good story? What are those traits that interest you? Like, what are the stories that you avoid as well? Like, what is it about, a story that really catches your eye or detracts you, that pulls you away from it?
I am most attracted to telling stories and hearing stories that have some sort of vulnerability in them. I have less interest in stories in which people are not growing emotionally or not telling some sort of story that like at least teases some emotional growth or something that they've learned. And I don't mean, and there's a lot of stories where they get to the end of it and say, and that's what I learned. And I'm like, I'm not talking that clear, but I mean, just from the start of a story to the end of a story, I really want to hear a journey that the storyteller goes on in order to be the person that's standing in front of us telling the story. And I think most people that tell their first story want to just kind of tell you from A to B some things that happened, or they want to tell you about an existential journey that happened in their head. And I think the really skilled storytellers are very good at telling you something that happened and giving you enough details for you to realize that they are now changed, whatever that may mean. Even in the ways they're picking the details to tell the very beginning of a story. I tell a story about prom, and in the beginning of the story, you can tell that from the way that I'm telling it, I'm telling about, my repressed childhood, how my parents were very strict, all of that. But from the way that I'm telling those details, you can tell that I have a feeling about that now, or I am not that person anymore. And so as I'm telling the story and have the perspective on it, I'm able to actually kind of pull out more details that make the story a little bit more rich as we go. So I'm interested in people like going on that journey and saying, not just, I don't want to just know what happened to you. I want to know why it impacted you. And I want you to weave that into the story about what that actually means without being so overtly stated, because I think a lot of times I think that the audience should be doing some work. I think there are movies and television shows and books that spoon feed the morals to the audience, and those are all written for children, and they're B movies in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? It's not necessarily the top movies that are just like being subtle and telling you what the lesson is, but like make the audience do a little bit of work to say, oh, and make those connections in their head. I feel like if you can get an audience to be sitting down looking at you and saying, oh, and you could see the wheels turning and see the connections being made and seeing them actually get with you, then you've done a very good job of telling a story. And those are the types of stories that I like.
We have a great guest. His work has been featured in LA Times, New York Times, New York Post, TMZ, Yahoo. I'm going to take a deep breath because the list goes on, including Billboard, the Associated Press, and CNN. He is a 25+ year veteran of the entertainment industry, and he is the founder of allhiphop.com. Please welcome the great Grouchy Greg Watkins. So for you, for all hip hop, what are those considerations that come to mind? What is good journalism, specifically when it comes to hip hop journalism, hip hop related journalism?
You nailed it, man. Being factually correct. There have been plenty of times where we have a story and we're ready to go because we know maybe the one source that's telling us is right and trustworthy, but it needs to be verified. And we can't be the first one to go and be wrong. I mean, it's just that simple, and there have been times where we've held back. There have been other times where we know our source is so correct and so right that we go. So it really is, having an understanding of being able to trust your sources, and in the instance of breaking news specifically, being able to trust your sources. outside of that, on every other story, I mean, we nail down and drill down on everything: months, dates, years. We make sure that those things are fact checked before they go up. We have an editor who does those things. And I mean, we're not perfect. There are times where we have been wrong on a date or a month or misspelled a name, but we try to go back and fix those things when they're called out. And the audience will call you out when you're wrong about things. And so, we're not too proud to say, you know what, we better go back in and fix this, because the goal is for us. We look at ourselves as chronicling hip hop history as well every day. And so we want another generation, when they go back and they want to untangle what happened in hip hop in March of 2007.
Yeah.
We want that to be right. We want it to be historically and factually accurate.
Yeah.
So we've always had a focus on making sure that those things are right. And there have been times where we pulled the trigger, so to speak, on a story because we knew we had to go. We were first, breaking news. And there have been times we said, you know what, we need to get a little more confirmation on this before we go. And we hold back. And if somebody breaks it before us, they break it before us.
Today, I have the privilege of being able to engage in a conversation with a seasoned public media professional whose journey spans over 25 years. Originally hailing from Brooklyn, New York, my guest has made a name for himself in jazz radio, from being a host at WEAA FM at Morgan State University to chief content officer at the renowned WBGO. He has a rich background in public media. Please welcome Stevan Vegas Smith. Talk about sort of the thinking going into that, the thinking that goes into like what you do on a day-to-day. And how that maybe applies to supporting like what you value, as a creative, as a person in the public media sphere.
So the job of chief content officer, that person oversees all of the content on the broadcast side and on the digital side. That's every program you hear on the radio to social media and articles on the website, podcasts that you produce with the team. And in accepting this role, even though there was a lot of knowledge I already gained through work experience and the things I did on my own, obviously I felt like I need more. I need to learn. I need the pulse of what's happening next, right? Whether it's for radio or it's for podcasting or whatever. And attending conferences was always a benefit for me, right? Like the past 2 years, I attended the Podcast Movement Evolutions Conference, which is more of the business-centered version. Like it's still podcasting, but you get a lot more information regarding the business of podcasting versus their other conference that's more so just celebrating content creators who podcast and things like that. And I would go there and I would take notes, and there are things that I'm grabbing for BGO or whatever organization I'm working for. But then I'm a podcaster. So there are things I'm grabbing for myself, techniques, things that worked. And it's really not that difficult, I think a lot of times we put pressure on ourselves, whether we're independent or we have a team that's independent or we work for an organization, to say podcasting needs to sound like this or this, but it's really not. That's why everybody losing money, because podcasts, people who listen and consume podcasts, like myself, we're not that picky, but it's oversaturated at this point.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I saw at the last conference I was at was, I think that was in Las Vegas, where I was sitting in a session and it was about production, right? Like, things that happen while you're recording an interview like this,
Mm-hmm.
and, what you fix in post and how you handle yourself in the moment. So I just wanted to hear what they were going to say. And everything that was said, I already knew. But there was one thing that stood out to me was this dude is just sitting here talking,
Mm-hmm.
and he's on a stage. And people are like, including myself, are taking notes and typing, and I'm like, he's not doing anything that people that look like me and you can't do and sound just as interesting. Because to your point, with podcasts being saturated and they're kind of being like a next, especially with the brothers, and I'm talking white brother, black brother, whatever you want to slice it, of it being a bro thing to have a podcast instead of something that could be a intellectual, interesting conversation. And that's when I got the idea for my little podcast, because I'd been podcasting for years, but I never fully committed to the production and to the performance of it. Yeah. Because it was casual. It was an offshoot of me doing strictly hip hop. And, I kept it that way to keep it from feeling like work. But the My Little Podcast project was my way to say, here's all my experience as a host, as an interviewer, as a production person, as a promotions person. Everything you see and hear, from the artwork to the quality of interviews, and trust me, there was some fix it in post moments for sure. I wanted it to be not only an example of what I can do, and all my skills, but I wanted to highlight people who weren't necessarily like, A-listers and stuff like that, and just say, this person has an interesting journey that can inspire you, even if you don't do any of this stuff. It may inspire you to do something totally different than what they're doing. Yeah. But hearing their story, maybe you can relate. So that was the whole objective, was highlighting us as as Black people, but also highlighting content creators of all kinds. And then for myself, just showing that I could put this together. And then I'll just share with my contacts that look different from us, and say, this is what you want from us,
A sought-after television personality, pop culture commentator, content creator, celebrity blogger, and motivational speaker who is also an expert on topics ranging from race and politics to television and film. Please welcome the great Lisa Durden. Is there an experience that, when you think of projects that are forthcoming, projects that are in production, 2024, and onward, is there an experience that you look back to, pre-Lisa, early Lisa, and think like, all right, this is absolutely something that I'm coming back to now, in this stage of my career, like one of those early points, like I won't be doing that again, or I've learned from this experience in the past?
Well, no. The worst of it all, I guess, if you will, was the experience of kind of like coming to an awakening about, the real way racism happens. And it's not always overt. Like the experience I just said earlier about the man, he didn't say, I want to make sure people know, tease up that these are going to be Negroes, but he was in essence saying that. So the biggest lesson was that racism is not always obvious and overt. Right? There's internal biases and all those other kind of things. So that was kind of like not a lesson, but my hardest aha moment or awakening, or, like, wow. But I will say the biggest, the most disappointing, if you will, or the ongoing struggle, if you will, is the journey itself, not quitting. So even from that point forward, once I picked up this kind of multi-hyphenate thing about me, where I'm not just on camera, I'm producing as well, in the in-between spaces where you feel a little safe when you get this like freelance job, right? Yeah. And then you go, and then it ends and you're back on the grind again. That space where you're always on the grind, and just like Taraji said, my last job did not put me in any position better for the next job. It's as if I never did the last job. No matter how successful I've been, no matter what I've done, just like Taraji, you're at the bottom. I never got another job after the last successful job as a freelance producer. I'm just using that as an example, where I didn't have to kind of act like I never did the job before and proving myself all the time. I never got that call saying you're put on. Right? I have gotten one or two calls where they're like, oh, hey, what's going on? What are you doing? Okay. I'll give you the example. I got a call. It wasn't like I saw something on LinkedIn and I applied for a job to be the producer for this this 2-hour crime show special called Diary of a Killer. So I got a call from the producer. She's got a bigger position now, but at the time she was the producer. And she said, "Hey, what you up to? What have you been doing lately?" She didn't even ask me about the job. So luckily I don't tell her my business. So I was doing another project, but I didn't tell her that because something always says, "Well, we're not friends. Why am I telling you my business? We're not friends like that." But so I just thought she was checking in on me. So I just said, "Oh yeah, I'm working at one of the community colleges a little bit and doing a little bit of something." So, and I didn't tell her I'm working on the Hulu project. I just didn't mention it because I felt like, why? Luckily, I didn't. If I had said, "Oh, I'm working on the Hulu project," she would have thought I was too busy. So I didn't mention it just because I just didn't. So she said, "Oh, by the way, I got a project I think I might want you to work on." So she mentioned this project. There was no title. And she said, "Okay." Now, I've been on this lady since 2006. I've been on it for a lot of years. This is like 2023 now. She's giving me this phone call around March. So I didn't just get the job because she's known me. She's seen all my projects. She sees me post. She knows what I do. I still had to prove myself. Not that I wasn't in strong consideration, because I'm sure because she did know me and know my background, I had some headway, but it wasn't like I was just like got the job on the strength of. I had to still send her my resume. She had to still share it with Matt. She said, and she said out of her mouth, "I can't promise you anything." She pitched the idea, said, "Sure, I'll send you my resume." It wasn't like it just came. So the struggle and the pain is the struggle and the pain. That journey, I'm not a journey girl. I'm a destination bitch. I want the destination. I'm like a kid in the car. Are we there yet? You know what I mean? Kids in the car. Are we there yet? I like a destination, but I can't change that there is no such thing as destination. You've got to do the journey. So the journey of having to continue to keep proving yourself, even though you've proven yourself because you're not at the top of the food chain. B, always being in and out of work because of the proving of yourself. It's not like you have this trajectory. I have a Hulu series out now. All these jobs are coming in. That middle part between you having your own projects and you needing to pay the bills is that middle part is the rough deal. And then that other end of it, you working for somebody else once you get a gig, the middle part where you got to keep getting a gig, to the part where the other extreme when you're doing your own projects, like I'm trying to do these other projects so I can become my own boss and mostly feed myself with my own projects. Do I give up? That's the struggle. All of that stuff is like in a pot of soup and all boiling together. That's a struggle. Do I give up? I'm not there yet. And age is an issue. As I age, I feel my mortality. I feel like I'm aging out. Not so much that I can't do something at 75 or 80, because people do that all the time, especially men. But I feel like, some things to me is a young girl's game or a young man's game. So it's all of those things that I have to fight in my head to overcome and just keep marching forward till death do me part from myself. But it's a very difficult thing because I don't have the faith. I don't have hope a lot of times. I'm hopeless. I make a joke to people who I know well. I'll say it on your show. People see me, "Oh, how you doing?" Not good. People can't handle the reality. When people see me, "Oh, what's been going on, Lisa? How you doing?" Not good. And they say dumb shit like, "Oh, not good. Oh, well, it'll be better tomorrow." Then I go, "Well, how do you know it's gonna be better tomorrow? Do you have a crystal ball? Do you realize it could be worse tomorrow?" So I just don't like those little stupid ass campy comments because people can't handle the truth. They can't. They're uncomfortable with the truth. So I try not to live my life in an inauthentic way anymore. I'm great, and I'm really not. I don't always give the details. So I try my best to make a promise to myself, and sometimes I'll say to the person, "Yeah, I don't have any hope. I'm a hopeless bitch or I'm a faithless bitch," and I just make a joke, but I really mean that. So what I try to do is I try not to abuse myself with words like hope and faith. I find those words to be abusive for me. So what I try to do is just do what I can if I wake up the next day. I do have plans, but I don't pine over them. So when I wake up the next day, I'll have my little notes and I'll go, "Okay, I woke up today. Well, here was my notes. Do this and this and this." And then I go to bed and wake up the next day if I can. So that's all I can do. Because if I actually try to think about the future, if I tried hard to think about what might be, I'm pitching this show, is it going to get picked up? And oh my God, or I was just on ABC News as the contributor, it's going to propel me. I have none of those thoughts because none of that stuff has worked for me. I didn't realize that being a Black woman is that difficult. Well, now I know I'm 50 something years old. So that's kind of the problem. So not necessarily specific uh, incidents, except for the one I mentioned with the Brick City thing. Brick City, not the docuseries, the Brick City magazine show, because there was two things I did that had the name Brick City. So it's more of that. And of course, along the way, I'm sure that a lot of the reason why I'm not where I need to be is because of racism. So I'm sure that there's an odorless smell or odorless poison that I don't, and things are looming I can't see. I'm not in rooms saying, give it to Samantha, so I'm not in rooms like that. But I'm sure the reason why the trajectory isn't there with not just the Lisa Durtons, but a lot of folks who have talent is because if you're Black with talent, you're not the same thing as Becky and Karen with the talent, or Bob and Ken with the talent. You're not going to get the same opportunities. And it's not an opinion, it's a fact. Yes, and people like to call out like 10 basketball players and 2 rappers and 1 Oprah. Sure, it's like Atlantic City. Atlantic City would be a fool if they didn't let people win, right?
Yeah.
If you never hear of people going to Vegas winning, you're not going to go to Vegas and play. Well, Vegas has to let a person win some money for you to believe you can be a winner. But we know that most people who are Black, I'm not going to say of color, because there is something called the proximity to whiteness. Other people of color have proximity to whiteness that we don't. If you have lighter skin and you're a Latino of some kind and you look light, if you're Indian, they dark as hell, but they still have proximity to whiteness because they're not quote unquote Black. But Black people, I'm talking about Black folks. So they're gonna make us believe we can be winners because they're gonna throw a couple of basketball players in front of us, a few rappers who live in mansions, and half of them are faking it too. But that's not most Black people. Right?
With over 40 years of expertise, nearly 50 if I'm being honest, my guest today is a Marconi and Billboard award-winning on-air personality and radio programmer. Their impressive career spans New York, Chicago, Atlanta, and of course, Washington, D.C., with notable contributions at Sirius XM satellite radio. My guest is a music historian, curator, podcast producer, and concert promoter. They excel in startup ventures, brand building, and marketing, particularly to the African-American market. Please welcome this industry giant, the great Max Myrick. So for you, what were some of those early things that maybe laid some of the foundation for how you approach your work, or your early interest in radio, or things of that nature? What led you on your path maybe from your youth?
Well, I grew up in Toledo, Ohio. And at the time I grew up, we didn't have Black radio in Toledo. We didn't have Black radio in Toledo until 1968. So I listened to, being so close to Detroit and being so close to Canada, I listened to a station called CKLW, which was a monster signal. It covered Detroit, Ohio. They gave the weather in Detroit, Toledo, Cleveland, and then they came back and gave it in Celsius for Canada. It was a monster. It's called the Big 8. And everything about that station was just bigger than life.
Yeah.
And being so close to Detroit, they had to be a little more soulful. So they played the requisite amount of Canadian music that was available, but the rest of it was all about Detroit, which was great for us because they played a lot of Black music. The DJs they were kind of hip. They were all white though,
yeah,
but they sounded like that. I didn't know they weren't Black until I met Ted Richards one time, and he looked like Clint Eastwood. I was like, wow, this is. But then later on, in my family, my mother, she loved music. And so music was all around all the time. And I used to go to the music store on the weekends and get the latest records because they at that time they had the tip sheets. The radio station would put out tip sheets. And the tip sheets were like a list of the hot songs.
Yeah.
And so you look down and see if you had all the latest hits. You wanted to have all the latest hits. And then, I have 4 sisters, so, they like to dance. And then in the summertime, we used to go to Sandusky, Ohio, where I was actually born, and stay with my grandmother. And she, you saw that film, Lackawanna Blues?
Yes.
She had a rooming and boarding house just like that, all a cast of characters. And so in the evenings when she would finish all her business, she would play her numbers.
Yeah.
Because it was a policy time. There were no lotteries. And part of her ritual was to, get her some Kessler's whiskey, a little Miller High Life,
As one
Orange
does.
Crush. That was the potion. And then she get her dream books and prayer candles out. And then my job was to play the latest music to set the mood for all of this whole ritual that happened every night. But my cousin had a record store. So during the day, I would just spend all my time in the record store, listening to music and watching what people were buying. And I was great. And so then I would bring all the hits home, and my sisters would dance. My grandmother would do her ritual. So all of that combined.
Yeah.
And then later on in around 68, there was a record store in Toledo called Clark's Record Store, Clark's One Stop or something like that. And he at that time, FM was not important. Nobody cared about FM.
Right.
So there was an FM signal that didn't have anything on it that was making money. So they gave him Saturdays for a couple of hours. He bartered the time, and he broadcast live from his record store, playing all the records, and everybody would go down there and buy the records and see him broadcasting live. People were scrambling to get FM because there was no FM radios around.
Right.
So that's where we were introduced to local radio. And then because it was so popular and they started making so much money, they made it full time. And so all the jocks in Detroit that couldn't get on WJLB or CHB or whatever stations that were on there, everybody can't get on the radio. A lot of talented people out here. So they heard about this station that was looking for people. So they came down. And so it was like the cream of the crop in terms of personalities. And that was big personality time. So those personalities were big, like the ones on CKLW, but they were all Black. And so they were speaking a different language that I could understand it. Right. I could start to tell the difference right away. And then you could see them, because they'd be out, and they're oh, that's Paul Brown. They had names, Charlie Chuck, and, they were just, and so I said, man, I want to do that. And so later on, I did. I went to the Marine Corps, and while I was in the Marines, we were out in the Mediterranean for a long time, like 7 months, and you'd be out there 30 days at a time, and so they had a ship entertainment system. So I just hang out in there when we weren't doing Marine Corps stuff.
Yeah.
And they let me, run the system. And when I got back, I enrolled in the University of Toledo. I got a job at a club, at a restaurant that was a nightclub, because disco was hot then, around 70, 76. And so I enrolled in the University of Toledo. They had a campus radio station.
Yeah.
And I met my lifelong friend, Michael Stratford, and he introduced me to a guy named Michael St. John, who was one of the jocks over there. He knew, that's an old school radio name, Michael St. John. he introduced me to Gary Outlaw, who was the music director, and they let me come over there as a part-time employee. And I when I wasn't in school, I was living over there, and in between that and work. And so one time I forgot to go to the club, and they fired me. So they just gave me more time to hang out at the radio station. Eventually, I got a full-time job, and the rest is history.
Wow. Thank you.
And that was a station I grew up listening to as a child, so it was even more thrilling.